everyone, welcome back to That Heathen Bastard. Remember, this is not a news show, this is a political platform for talking points from a fairly ordinary perspective. Not a politician, just an ordinary guy. Now, today I wanted to talk about, to balance out the other video I did today, I wanted to talk about the idea of condemning the GOP. Now, the Grand Old Party, remember, was founded on the platform of freeing the slaves while keeping the Union together. And from my understanding, they appeared to succeed in that goal, but mostly on a technicality by not recognizing the Southern Confederacy. Right? So that being said, I just want to talk a little bit about the idea of conservatism and what that would mean to me. Now, I know there are people who think I'm not a real conservative because I'm so moderate or just not very macho. I admit I'm not a garden variety right-winger. I really am not. I'm very much my own sort of distinct animal. Right, my sort of brand of conservatism is rooted in the root word of conservative, which is to conserve things. So from my point of view, nature conservation is a right-wing issue. So maybe even climate change might be a right-wing issue. Cultural conservatism and fiscal conservatism. So culture and tradition and saving money are right-wing issues. But also avoiding forcing your morals on other people and violating individual liberty and freedom. Also a right-wing issue. I see the Constitution as the highest law. And as it comes to homosexuality, my view is that prior to Christianization, homosexual union was a standardized Western tradition for thousands of years. It only became taboo when the Christians became the majority religion. So it's actually very traditional to have homosexual union. It is very traditional. It is very ancient. You're going back to the Greeks and the Romans, who in many ways are our founders, the pillars of Western civilization being Greek philosophy, Roman law, modern science, and then Judeo-Christian values, and that last one I think is honestly possibly debatable. To some extent. Suffice to say, conservatism is more about the spirit of the tradition rather than the tradition itself. The flame that caused the fire to start, the spark, is more important than the flame. Something the tradcons will not fully understand. Sort of the 700 clubs and the old school hardcore evangelical Christians. Those types who love the nifty 50s and probably honestly worship Ronald Reagan. Versus the neocons who if he wasn't such a criminal scumbag, would probably get down and worship Richard Nixon, who was the archetypal neocon. The tradcons are very stuck in their ways. They're incredibly stubborn. And you don't have to be forward-thinking. You just have to be willing to accept the fact that times change, and therefore the old ways do not always serve. You have to adapt to a changing world. And if you look at the narrative of nature, the creature that does not change does not survive. I learned this a long time ago because of one of my favorite tabletop games, which I currently play digitally nowadays, and that is the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game. In the first episode of the anime, the game's creator in the show, Pegasus J. Crawford, one of his first things he says is, the game is changing every day. And that's literally true. Technically, if you play it tomorrow, if you play the game today and then play it tomorrow, you're playing two different games, arguably. And life is a lot like that. It's constantly changing and shifting and moving. It's evolution, it's adaptation, but the tradcons miss out on this reality. They're stuck in the nifty 50s. And honestly, a country run by tradcons would be pretty awful for a number of people. It would be awful for LGBT. It would be awful for LGB. It would be awful for black people. Or many other people, and not even all white people. The truth about America is it was pretty intolerant to Like, yeah, it was less intolerant to white people, but you still had to be the right kind of white person. Meaning you had to be directly descended from first wave European colonists. And maybe second wave. Third wave was disliked for being largely half European and half Jewish. Or even full-blooded Jew. And that was a bridge too far. Oh no, we can't have them here. We can't have not Ashkenazis and Mizrahim here. No way, man. Like, that was the tradcons. Intolerant and stuck in the mud. A big racist stick in the mud. And that's not the kind of conservatism I want to entertain. And those elements are still present in the GOP. And I commend the GOP for doing mostly what they could to scrub such individuals. But I also have to condemn them for not doing the same for the useless neocons who bend the knee in the name of compromise and diplomacy and blah, 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 blah. As the old saying goes, only Nixon can go to China. And as I would expand upon that idea, only a neocon can go to the DNC and feel right at home. The neocons are basically Democrat light. They are more like progressives than even I am. And as I said, I am a moderate. I sit closer to someone like a Ted Cruz or a Rand Paul. I have very little respect for Mitch McConnell or for many of his buddies. And I would love to see them get just primaried into non-existence. I would also like to see the more extreme individuals, like maybe Marjorie Taylor Greene, if she still supports a more hybrid neocon-tradcon view of diplomacy to a degree while sympathizing for someone like Q. I have no sympathy for QAnon. I have no sympathy for QAnon whatsoever. I see them as essentially a second generation of the people who started the Satanic Panic back in the 80s, who helped to end people's lives and ruin them based on the lies of Lawrence Pasdar. And there's a brilliant CBC podcast on the Satanic Panic you can look up. Just go onto YouTube and look up Satanic Panic Podcast, and it should be the first thing that pops up, and you'll see the whole history. And then you'll understand why I hate tradcons and sort of hybrid trad neos and conservative Christians and many Christians in general, and why I feel they are a danger, and why the neocons cannot be counted on to take care of these more extreme elements. Now, from my understanding, the state of the modern GOP is one of weakness, more than anything. The extremism is nicely contained, but only by the people who are willing to get off their asses and do something. You see Mitch McConnell on Twitter, and he's just like, boy, those Democrats over there sure are awful. And I'm like, okay, Mitch, and your solution to them is what? I don't see a solution coming from your camp. And maybe there never going to be one, because maybe that's not in your current best interest, Mitch. That maybe you don't want to actually do anything, because maybe you're one of these guys I was talking about, that only a neocon could feel at home in the DNC. Maybe you're just Democrat light. And then maybe you should be removed in favor of Rand Paul. That maybe Rand Paul should be in charge of the GOP, and that have Ted Cruz run for president. Now that would be amazing. And then we can have Chip Roy in the position of essentially grilling the Democrats for all their scumbag policies and their elitist, snobby, criminal scum friends. And then maybe the GOP won't be so lame. Won't be such a lame duck party. They're fine at the state and local level. It's really only when you get into like Washington D.C. that they're so horribly useless. And there are better ways to fight or critique the Democrats, I think. I have some ideas anyway. I'm certainly not a great debater. When it comes to debate, I would say I'm like a street punk. I win a lot of unsanctioned arguments, a lot of debate, a lot of unmoderated street debates, right? Where you just have to expect your opponent to not use ad hominem. And it just goes point, counterpoint, point, counterpoint until one of you runs out of points. And then you win automatically. That's how I would normally win those anyway. So I'm not a great debater. I just know how to present points and wait for people to run out of arguments, which in my case is pretty inevitable. I don't have to wait long. But I have some ideas. For one thing, I would think it would be a good idea to, before you get into a debate or a fight or a critique of a Democrat, to dig into their personal history, dig into their net worth, their quotes, their recent attitudes, their ideas, and sort of create a kind of mental dossier to sort of turn against them and use statistically backed data so they can't actually get out of it. And any attempt would look like would look like they were squirming. Make them squirm. Also, whenever they try and do the same thing to you, try making a reasonable apology by saying, I'm sorry I said that, I'm sorry I felt that way, I'm not that person anymore, I've grown beyond that, that was then, this is now. Right? Make it seem like you've grown, even if you really haven't. You should grow. Right? You should grow, and you should show that you've grown beyond that so that it takes away much of its power. That you're a different man now. That won't satisfy far-left extremists, but it should satisfy anybody who's reasonable. Further to the point, I would also recommend that you sort of provoke them into provoke them into an ad hominem, but don't make it overt. Sort of tease them a little and make them a little angry without directly insulting them. That might be an interesting tactic to use. Anyway, I wanted to move on next to the idea that sanity being found closer to the center of the arguments rather than anywhere in between. You get, on either side. The center is where you find more sanity. I have had conversation with far left and far right in the past, and I consider them both equally crazy. It isn't the direction, okay? It's the distance. It's the distance that makes it all truly insane. And the closer you get to the center, the more sanity you find. That does mean drawing a hard line. There is a difference between center-right and center-left. There are hard lines. Center-right are typically pro-life. Center-left are typically pro-choice. Center-right is balance the budget but also have welfare. Center-left is sort of manage the inflation and have slightly more welfare. There's very pertinent distinctions. So I want to say that the Republicans should probably become more of a center-right party than they already are. Become a little more center and get rid of some of the more of the weirdos like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Sort of alienate Q and push them away from the GOP so that it becomes harder for hardcore Democrats to sort of conflate the two together with that statement, GQP, that sort of little insult. Condemn Q and push them away. Don't do it all the time, but do it frequently and often, so you can sort of push them aside. Be the sane, moderate, right-of-center party that gets shit done, and you will be so unbelievably powerful. But anyway, those were just some of my thoughts. There will be a link in the description down below to my books. Please buy, download, read them, and as always, tschüss, peace.